All right. 4:30 having arrived, we will call to order the Finance Committee meeting of Monday, April 25th, 2022, and I'll ask Dave to call the roll.
Council President Furman,
Present.
Vice President Curry,
Here.
Alder Carter,
Present.
Alder Verveer,
Here.
Alder Figueroa Cole,
Here.
Mayor, you have quorum.
Thank you. All right. All right, I'm just noting our registrants on my agenda. Can we have the meeting instructions, please?
All right. Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members of the committee, if you're able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you're able, please activate your video when you're speaking. In this meeting, panelists have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Panelists also have the ability to add pronouns after their names if they choose. Please do not alter the current naming convention. Simply add text after your name. Please use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Staff, please use the raise hand feature when you're asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. Staff will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the committee, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Mayor, floor is yours.
Thank you. Our first item is general public comment. We have one registrant, Mike Keto of District 4.
Good evening. Thanks so much for making time for me. I'm speaking to you about something that is not yet on your agenda, but will be forthcoming, and I'm very concerned about it. The Finance Department will be requesting that a vacant position on my team, the Administrative Support Team, be eliminated to create another much-needed position. I can answer all sorts of details about this when it finally comes to you, but I want to let you know in advance that it'll be catastrophic for my workload and my mental health. I am already stretched very thin, as is my team. And every day that goes by without us posting a vacant position for the administrative support clerk endangers my ability to staff the November election. It takes all three of us and overtime to get this done. And so I would beg you to please find some other way to fill this needed staffing vacancy without reducing my team from 3 to 2.
Thank you. Are there questions for our registrant? Seeing none, thank you. That brings us to disclosures and recusals. Are there any disclosures or recusals on items on today's agenda? Seeing none. Takes us to the consent agenda. We have registrants wishing to speak on items on item 11, and we have registrants here available to answer questions on item 17 and 21. So we will exclude item 11 from the consent agenda. Are there other items that members of the body would like to see excluded from the consent agenda? Alder Verveer?
Thank you, Mayor. I have questions on agenda items number 4 and 12. I did have 11 on my list, but that's taken care of. And I see from Christine's email that agenda item number 9, which I also had questions about, will be referred. So just 4 and 12 added to the list, please.
Right. Are there any other items that alders would like to see excluded from the consent agenda? Not seeing any. So let's just then confirm that we are excluding item 4, that the motion on item 9 will be referral to the June 6th Finance Committee. And note that there are attachments on items 11 and 13. I trust that by not excluding the items, you don't have questions for the registrants on items 17 or 21. So once again, our exclusions are 4, 11, and 12. Alder Furman?
I'd like to move consent agenda, excluding items 4, 11, and 12, and making a note that we're referring item number 9 to the June 16th meeting.
Is there a second?
Yeah.
Alder Curry will second. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of the consent agenda? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of the consent agenda. And that will bring us to item 4, which is Legistar 71040, adopting and confirming the labor agreement between the City of Madison and Iaff Local 311. We do not have any registrants on this item, so Alder Furman, a motion, please.
Move adoption.
Moved
Second.
and seconded by Alder Curry. Alder Verveer, questions?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. Traditionally, since we don't have many collective bargaining agreements left post Act 10, we have asked the labor relations staff to give a brief overview of settled contracts. Obviously, in this case, we had a fairly comprehensive conversation in closed session at our last Finance Committee meeting. But I did want to take the opportunity in public session to acknowledge our labor relations manager, Greg Leifer, on the occasion of his well-deserved retirement. And so I don't know, Greg, if for the final time you wish to give us a quick overview, or if Aaron would be most appropriate to do that.
I was lead chair on this bargain, so it falls to me. But you're right. We did do a pretty extensive review in closed session. It's a 3-year agreement. Is item number 1 on my report states. Number 2, for some reason, the fire contract lacked the last step of longevity that all the other city employees have enjoyed. So we added that in. You can see the cost in the fiscal note. Item 3 is just really moving some money around, but it does not have, it's cost neutral to the city. Item 4 is the vacation sellback. They can currently, members of the bargaining unit can currently sell 3 days of vacation back to us, up to 99 shifts for the entire bargaining unit. We went to 5 and 135. This has some impact on our overtime. We just don't know how to check that quite yet, because we don't know if everybody will fully use that or not. We added Juneteenth as a paid holiday and Whole Chunk as a paid leave day. We added the peer support premium. You can see that it cost less than $10,000. And we added tiller pay for the engine at the Fire Station 1 that has a tiller on it. You can see the cost there. It's less than $10,000. And then we agreed to a 1.5% increase for 22. That's a cost for fire of $696,000. 1% and budgeted, so that's $464,000. So there's a $232,000 additional cost that wasn't budgeted for. And in years 2 and 3, I'll let the fiscal note speak to that. And then lastly, like I said, that vacation sellback, and there was also some changes in sent home early and what they call PDX, or paying it back, basically, if you get sent home early. That there were some changes there. But we don't know what the impact of overtime is going to be. There's going to be some impact of overtime. We just can't calculate that cost at this time. I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Greg. I don't know if you wish to address this or our finance director, but you want to speak to the effect this has on general municipal employees as per the previously adopted resolution, or would that be more appropriate for Dave to comment on?
I can certainly handle it, and Dave can correct me if I'm wrong. We talked to, of course, the mayor and finance about the 1.5% and the impact of general municipal employees. It will kick in the Me Too clause. It will have an impact on the budget of about $420,000 that wasn't budgeted for this year. So altogether, it's a little over $700,000 in additional costs that was not budgeted for.
Thank you. And then Dave, do you wish to comment on that? Anything beyond what's in the fiscal note? It sounds like you anticipate there might be this might be subject of either mid-year or end-of-year appropriation from the contingent reserve or elsewhere.
That's correct. Yeah, we'll definitely monitor what's happening with appropriations, agency appropriations throughout the year. The numbers that Greg was citing were general library and fleet funds, just so you're aware. This will also affect the enterprise funds as well, to differing degrees. But yeah, I think that's a good general overview.
Thank you, Dave. And I see that we have our newly minted fire chief with us, Chief Carbon. Chief, did you wish to speak on any aspect of the agreement? I certainly want to, on behalf of all of us, give you a hearty welcome to your very first City Finance Committee meeting in your new role, and we look forward to working with you closely moving forward. So Chris, a hearty welcome. Did you wish to speak to anything relating this, perhaps peer support, provision, or anything else?
Yeah, thank you, Alder, and I appreciate being here. And thank you for the welcome. Obviously, this was largely done before my position, and so all the hard work, I think, went in before I had the opportunity to participate. But I support the document as written. I think where the dollars were spent in terms of things, as you mentioned, like peer support, is well-directed dollars. So I'm in support of the work that was done to this point.
Thank you very much, and obviously, belated congratulations, and we're excited to work with you. I do have one quick kind of parochial question from downtown, and that is I had asked Chief Davis in prior Finance Committee meetings, and even offline, I think, when we received the new fancy tiller, otherwise known as Ladder 1 or Truck 1 on Dayton Street, how those tiller drivers would be utilized. Would those be AEs, apparatus engineers, or would they receive additional compensation? How that all works, and Steve would inevitably answer, it's all a conversation in progress with 311, et cetera. My question to you is: have those driving the tiller, the end of Ladder 1, received additional compensation up until this contract, or not?
No, to this point, there's been no premium pay at this point. They've all gone through extensive training, obviously, and have been driving. But I believe this pay will kick in for the first time when the contract is executed.
Very good. Well, I certainly think it's deserved. It requires additional skill I certainly wouldn't have. So thanks very much. And again, welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
I also, Mayor, just want to take the opportunity to once again say to Greg how much I've enjoyed working with him over the years as a member of the Committee on Employee Relations and as a member of this committee. And so I certainly want to wish you, on behalf of all of us, Greg, very well-deserved retirement and best wishes in the future to you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Are there any other questions for staff on item 4? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of item 4? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor. And that will take us to item 11, which is Legislator 70597, approving a land sale and agreements with Dane County regarding portions of the Yahara Hills Golf Course. And on this item, we have registrants starting with Catherine Cox of District 16. And then we have several folks here available to answer questions. Catherine?
Mayor, it looks like Catherine Cox is not with us.
Okay. Well, they did email their comments, so I encourage you to take a look at those. On this item, we also have John Welch representing Dane County, Roxanne Winnicke, similarly from Dane County, available to answer questions. And of course, we have our own staff here, including Charlie Romines. Are there questions on item 11? Alder Verveer?
Thank you, Mayor. My questions relating to this topic are actually all really related to the golf enterprise. I think the resolution and the material that was in our packets did an excellent job explaining the streets division's role in this and the future tipping fee agreement and so forth. But then I saw about a half hour ago in Christine's email to all of us that Superintendent Knapp prepared a memo on exactly this series of questions I was planning to ask him today. So Eric, I have not had a chance to review your memo. I've actually been on the phone for the last half hour since the email came in. Would you like to give an overview of your memo, or would you like me to proceed immediately to the few questions I had about the golf enterprise?
Superintendent Knapp?
Good evening. I can give an overview, Alder, if that's what you'd prefer. Sorry, catch my breath. You guys are quick. Out in the field.
Yes, we're very efficient tonight. Would it be easier, since I see you're in a motor vehicle, would it be easier if
I'm not driving. I'm at a park.
I figured you pulled over.
No, I ran back to the car. You guys got there quicker than I thought you would. But no, I can certainly go over the memo or answer questions, whichever is easier for you.
Well, what's your preference, Eric?
Alder, why don't you just ask your questions?
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you. So the couple of questions I had when I was reviewing the resolution in detail, again, before we had the benefit of your memo this afternoon, was if you could remind us what the existing balance was that the golf enterprise owes the general fund.
Certainly. At the end of 2021, after we make the payment as outlined in the original authorization for the advance, the balance will be right at $700,000.
Very good. So the funds from the county will first and foremost go toward paying off that kind of long-term debt, if you will, or advance to the general fund, and that'll be about $700,000 of the funds that we'll receive from Dane County.
Is that
okay? Very good. And then the other question I had, obviously, it goes without saying it, but a significant infusion of desperately needed funds for the golf enterprise. I think your memo, but again, I only glanced at it, described what options or opportunities that this funding will provide to shore up the golf enterprise and start tackling our significant backlog of deferred maintenance and so forth on our courses. Am I correct? Did your memo cover that? And could you, or whether it did or didn't, could you give us a summary of how you see as superintendent to be the most pressing needs and what the funds will be used for first and foremost?
Yeah, certainly, Alder. And the memo does cover an overview and where we are today. We don't have a final plan in detail. Those all of our plans will be, part of the ongoing capital and operating budgets into the future, potentially even somewhat this year would be the goal if this actually moves forward. We think the most pressing issue is the course conditions at Odana, Monona, and Yahara. Obviously, the Glen Golf Park has been fully updated on the golf course side of things. There'll be something coming in the next month or so to update that clubhouse as well, which is exciting with private support. We still have a significant backlog of capital needs. The Odana clubhouse is still our oldest and worst performing building in the park system. But we think the focus needs to be on the core revenue generation. And because that revenue is what pays for taking care of the golf course, but the golf course is also parkland. And with where we are, we want, the golf task force found we should provide municipal golf, and they actually suggested and recommended that we should offer 54 holes at 18 fewer Yahara, which actually over the next 20 years, if this agreement with the county moves forward, would be what we'd be operating. We would focus, I think, the way we're looking at it right now, and working with our labor partners, is to hire, we're thinking 3 LTE type employees, so full-time with benefits, so not seasonal here, that would join the golf team to do tree care, bunker restoration, irrigation repairs, drainage repairs at all those courses. If you recall, when we talked about the task force and the debt, the gargantuan capital stack needed is much less now. First and foremost, because Yahara is a lot easier to temporarily, like 20-25 year, fix 18 than to restore 36, right? So it's an order of magnitude and a half less. We think an investment of $1 million to $1.5 million, mostly with staff that we control and manage, so they can be more efficient and not interrupt revenue generation, can do a whole lot to buy us 20 years of play. And if you amortize that out, it's a pretty modest investment. But that's kind of the approach with the courses. And again, I want to make sure the finance committee and the alders, the park commission understands these courses as parkland have been, there's a lot of tree care needs. There's a lot of just general land maintenance that needs to occur. That's why we think lessons we've learned from the Glen Golf Park project, we can pull into our system, knowing what we can do now, and seeing an example, if that makes sense. But that's our hope, is start there. And then the council is ultimately going to decide, and then that would not exhaust all those resources. There'll still be more resources left in reserves. It offers us the opportunity to potentially consider borrowing versus future profit streams, which the last 2 years have looked really good. We hope to sustain that. Because, previously, over the last decade, borrowing is not an option. Revenue bonds can't be issued on a fund that was in such a bad condition, right? This would stabilize that a ton. But ultimately, the council will decide, like Odana Clubhouse, do we want to rebuild a small scale, meet the core needs of golf for maybe $800,000 using these funds? Or do we want to do something bigger and more complementary to the park system? Those will be decisions made in the future and as part of future capital budgets, Alder.
Thank you, Eric. And then lastly, two follow-ups to moving forward in the future plans. First, I presume that the golf subcommittee will be active participants in moving forward with the plan and prioritizing how to utilize these newfound resources.
Well, the golf subcommittee is not a fiduciary, but certainly as far as engagement towards the needs, of course, them and as well as many other golfers in the community. We want to responsive to golfers' needs. I think if you poll the golf subcommittee, you would hear that there's a lot of problems at Monona bunkers and Yahara bunkers and Odana irrigation, right? And drainage. I mean, it's pretty well known. But yes, that we have a lot of work to do to prioritize what goes first. But we didn't want to get the cart completely before the horse here either.
I completely understand. Yeah, I'm sure if I called my friend Warren Onken, he would have all sorts of ideas on how to spend this money.
And Warren would have mostly good ideas.
Anyway, then very lastly, do you foresee coming forward to the Finance Committee and the Council yet this year with potential budget amendments in terms of hiring the LTEs you mentioned, or are you thinking that we would see this all through the capital budget and operating process exclusively for next year?
Alder, it's a little, I'm not positive, but I'll say it this way. What we have before you tonight also is a series of lease agreements that allows us to operate 36 holes and provide that, because we really want to retain the customers we built the last 2 years. The profitability last year's in golf has been phenomenal. I'm positive last year was the best year ever in the history of Madison Parks running golf courses. We want to sustain that customer relationship. So we got to be able to provide those holes and opportunities, right? And reminder, last year we operated 63 holes. Glenway was down most of the year. But we have an opportunity with these lease agreements for $1 back from the county, where we have 2 years of 36 holes and 3 years with 27 at Yahara. So looking at the timing, looking at the approach, I suspect we're going to come to the conclusion that if we can focus and get it done, that we would come back to the council yet this year to try to, and personnel board and finance committee, but we need to talk with the mayor's office and other agencies, engineering, about stormwater. There's a lot of little details, but I suspect it's very possible, right? If that's the avenue we're going to go, it might make sense to go sooner. And I think long term, no matter what's golf and what's not, we need to take care of this land better. And the first core piece of action will be working on the land management plans, including tree care. Because I'm not necessarily ashamed, but the reality is our level of tree care and land management outside of the playing portions of the golf courses has not been great because of a lack of resources, not because staff is bad. They just don't have the resources. And this would significantly improve that opportunity.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thanks very much, Eric. And thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter, questions?
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for the memo. My question is twofold. One, as you know, the Yahara golf course is very important to many of the African American golfers in the city. So I just wanted to make sure that we are preserving parts of that golf course for them. And I'm sure it's important to others, but that is the one that seems to be the choice for African American golfers over the years. So that's the first part. The second part is the potential of hiring three employees, LTEs, and they will be joining how many employees that deals with the maintenance?
The maintenance of the golf courses is currently managed, all 4 courses, all 700 acres, by 5 individuals, and that includes the mechanic, 5 permanent staff.
Okay, so that would bring you up to 8, correct?
Yeah, it would bring us to 8 for that period of time for the reinvestment. And as I mentioned in the memo or allude to, not all of our 5 will be here forever. Not that we want them to go. So we actually see this as an opportunity to secure talented staff, bring them on, help them build a system that eventually at least maybe 1 or 2 of them would stay with us over the long term by transitioning into those previously authorized positions upon retirements. And certainly, Alder Carter, it is not lost on me that the African-American golfer in Madison chooses Yahara over others significantly. The task force found that. That's why I think it's imperative that we invest in Yahara and we don't just run it in the ground. And it's also imperative why with the other 3 courses we work like we are going to be this year at the Glen Golf Park and all of our courses to be more inclusive and open and welcoming. Mm-hmm. We have a culture shift we know we have to make. I know it, you know it, a lot of people know it. And I'm excited. My team's excited to continue to working towards that. We need a more inclusive, overarching system.
Thank you for that. And then you mentioned the investment, a little over $1 million over 20 years, I believe.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go.
No, I was saying we anticipate, and this includes like the staff and supplies and stuff. We think between 1 million and 1.5 million would allow the 18 holes that we would be operating under the agreement with Dane County into the foreseeable future, at least until 2042, likely, in conversations with Dane County, likely longer. They're not going to kick us off the little small lease we'll have for 3 of those holes until they need to, and that's likely longer. We think a 1 to 1.5 million investment would deal with the irrigation, the bunkers, mow lines, tree care in a way that, number one, provides a reasonable, affordable, accessible golf experience for those 18 holes. And number two, sets the table with a better managed land for us to decide as a community 20 years from now, what are we going to do with it? Because I want to be clear, it is not impossible that golf stays. I don't think it's logical for golf to stay in the way we think about golf today. But I've learned over time that golf and how it's thought about and how it's valued in the community changes. So who knows? But we know taking better care of the land will be better long term.
Thank you for that, Eric.
You have any other questions for staff? All right, seeing none, then President Furman, a motion, please.
Motion.
That's a motion to adopt, I believe. And is there a second? And it's seconded by Alder Curry. Is there discussion? Alder Curry?
Thank you, Mayor. I had lowered my hand earlier, just asking a question that is already answered in the memo. So thank you, Superintendent Knapp. Just wanted to provide some context in terms of opposition that I know Ms. Cooks, I think, emailed to us. But knowing that staff went through a thorough presentation last week about continued use of that area, there was some concern over it being possibly converted to more landfill after we build the current one that's still in proposition. So just wanted to say that staff had clarified that as well, along with the memo about converting into sustainability over the next 100 years.
Thank you, Alder. Any further discussion? Alder Verveer?
Thank you. Just to note that Miss Cook said, I think you called on earlier, is I see in the meeting raising her hand. If we could call on her and see if we can facilitate her testimony now before we vote.
Is there any objection to going back to public comment? Seeing no objection. Can staff unmute, please?
Yep. Catherine, you should have a prompt to unmute yourself.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I did send in an email, but I did want to read this into the record because we did not touch on particulates at all, and I do think that that's something that needs to be touched on. There's been a great deal of discussion about the odors emanating from the current landfill, and while I do understand that we need to have a place for garbage to go, what we don't know is what the current effects of the current landfill has had on us as far as particulates go. And when I talk about particulates, I'm talking about the atmospheric aerosol particles, or the microscopic particles of solid or liquid matter that are suspended in the air. And when we're talking about landfills, and there are 3 different types of contaminants, and those are TSP, the suspended particulate matter, inhalable particulate matter, or PM10s, and respirable particulate matters, PM 2.5s. And TSP, or total suspended particulate matter, refers to particles less than 44 microns. And those are the types of, when there are enough of them, those are the particulate matters that we see in the air. You know, when we see dust or smog, that type of thing. And those are things that we know we're breathing in. But then when we see PM10s or inhalable particulate matter, those are particles that are less than 10 microns in aerodynamic diameter, and those are inhalable portions, and they have the ability to enter the lungs, and those are particles that we aren't seeing. And when exposed to elevated levels of PM10 over a long period of time, they have negative health effects. PM10s, in fact, even short-term exposure can lead to premature mortality, asthma attacks, chronic bronchitis, and respiratory symptoms. And when I talk about short-term effects, that can be 24 hours or less. And repeated short-term effects, exposure can lead to a whole host of long-term health problems. And then we have PM 2.5, and that's the respirable particulate matter. And that refers to the solid or liquid particles that are less than 2.5 microns in aerodynamic diameter. And these particles are referred to as the respirable portion of particulate matter, as very small particles that can be inhaled into the lungs and are small enough to reach the gas transfer sites in the lungs. That means these can get into your bloodstream. And when exposed to these elevated levels over a long period of time, there's detrimental health effects. These particles can travel deep into the lungs and worsen lung function, increase and affect heart disease, and lead to a whole host of other long-term health effects. It can increase rates of chronic bronchitis, reduce lung function. It can lead to lung cancer and heart disease. And infants, children, and the elderly are especially at risk. And then, how do we get these particulates from the landfill? Well, it isn't just from the garbage itself. There are a whole host of ways that we can end up being exposed to these particulates. And the thing is we don't even know what our exposure has been so far in the Secret Places neighborhood or the communities that are nearby to the current landfill. We don't even know what our effects have been so far from particulates. I don't know that there's been a study done. And so what we don't know is from the sources of those particulates, what information do we have from Rotafeld? Do we have that information? Has it been collected during the time Rotafeld has been in operation? And if so, why haven't we had that openly shared with us? And if it hasn't been collected, why not? We need to know the effect Rotafeld is currently having before we begin to discuss opening another site, especially in the same area. We need to know about particulates at Rotafeld site now and what can be expected at the sustainability campus. We're talking about particulate matter sources as they can be broken down into several categories. And these are, atmospheric. Roadway sources. A roadway network consisting of paved and unpaved roads is present on landfill sites. PM emissions, particulate matter emissions, are produced when vehicles traveling along these roads stir up dust particles from the roadway surface.
Thank you. That's your time. Are there questions for the registrant? All right. Seeing none, is there discussion? Alder Curry?
Thank you, Mayor. Can I ask Director Welch to respond to some of the inquiry that was just made about air particles or mitigating factors that the current landfill is using?
Is there any objection? Seeing none, let's get Director Welch on, please.
All right, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, thank you for bringing up these concerns. We actually do have particulate matter as part of our existing air permit at our landfill. And so it is something that we track and do report on to the DNR, which then gets reported on to the EPA through our air permit. As the speaker mentioned, this can be from a number of sources, including from the roads and traffic driving over the roads, or from emissions from vehicles or engines on the site as well. So we do have that information available. We'd be happy to share it. This is the first I think we've been asked for it, but happy to make that available. And it is part of our air permit, and we do comply with those portions of our air permit at all times.
Thank you, Alder. Don't see any other questions or discussion. The motion is to adopt item 11. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item 11. We'll go on to item 12, which is Legislator 70872, amending the 2022 capital budget to transfer funding from reconstruction streets to right-of-way landscaping. On item 12, let's get a motion first.
Move adoption.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt. Alder Verveer, you had questions?
Yes, thank you. And these would be mainly for Deputy City Engineer Freeze. Greg, I certainly want to acknowledge that Greg, others of your colleagues are here, including Carissa Wagner, who would probably answer specific questions if we have any about individual sites. Greg, I know when we spoke offline about this, you said you thought it might be helpful to share a slide or two with the committee. I don't know if you still feel that way and want to share that slide before I ask you a specific question about my parochial concerns.
Sure. Let me think I can do that here. Let's see. All right. Everybody should see my Word document. Is that what everybody is seeing, hopefully?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I gave a version of this at the PWI meeting probably a month and a half ago at this point. So just to kind of reference where we are and how we got here and where we're going. So I'll be quick about this. So just a quick summary here in terms of background. Prior to the early 2000s, medians in Madison largely did not have planting beds. They had mostly turf and trees, and some of them, not even all of them at that time. But early 2000s, this really kicked off with East Washington back at that time. When East Washington was being designed, then Mayor Cheslevich felt strongly that it needed to be highly landscaped at the time. And so that was added to that contract. And then subsequently, after that, there was a movement to the Adopt a Median program. We also started doing conversions of medians to planted beds every year. We started adding these to a contract. And back in 1998, just for a little bit of reference, the capital portion of the budget for the was $60,000 a year. The operating budget way back in 2005, which as far as I could find, was $85,000 to maintain this stuff. And we continued doing what I would call our standard approach, which was installing planted, largely perennial beds inside of turf medians until about 2017. And then in 2017, we started using the engineering and other budget to largely say, we're having, all the way back in 2017, we were having problems getting contractors to do this work for us, to do maintenance of these planted beds. And these planted beds are highly maintenance intensive. It requires removal of mulch every couple of years, new mulching. Plants have a very decided life cycle. They only last a handful of years in these settings and they have to be replanted. And this work is very difficult to do because most of these medians are in high traffic areas. And so we have traffic limitations in terms of when they can work, right? Non-peak hours. And you have to set up traffic control to do the work. So it's hard to do the work. And we've typically only gotten 2 to 3 companies bidding on this work in the last, 5 to 7 years. And so as we go through this, we started converting over into lower mow grasses, clover, and some low mow. I don't want to call it prairie, that's the wrong term, but it's low mow flowering, like meadow type stuff. And we've had good success in some areas and limited success in others. So we are still trying to do that. So why are we here? Why are we proposing something? So in 2021, our operating budget to maintain all these planted beds was $165,000. With the 22 budget, it's reduced to 86. Okay. And to do that, we have two approaches. One is a lot of the beds that we constructed under contract in the 2000s were cut into large turf beds. So if you think of the best example of this is Northport Drive. We have a little checker pattern beds, most typically of daylilies, cut into large turf islands out there. And so we were going to convert largely those types of things back into all turf. And then we were also going to convert a lot, and this is the best examples are in East Washington, where we have medians that are anywhere between 3 and 5 feet wide that were planted. And those are way too narrow. I don't know if Eric is still on the call, but our minimum is a 6 foot wide area for parks to be able to mow. And I think they would say that that's still not ideal, but that's the minimum. And so we're going to convert those to colored stamped concrete, which is a lot of that is already out on East Wash and some of these other areas. And then I did mention we are going to try and get a sponsor to do some of this stuff in areas where it makes sense to do that, which might be out on the UW by the engineering campus right before Campus Drive splits off, and potentially Monona Terrace. Just a couple updates here that came in the last week or so. Carissa did bid out 3 contracts to continue to maintain the ones that we are planning to maintain. And those came in significantly over budget, or well, not over budget, but over what we have typically bid, seen in terms of bids. And we did get back to those bidders. We had 3 contracts and 2 bidders on 3 contracts. They have no additional capacity to take on work. So much like the city of Madison is having the same problem trying to get seasonal staff, landscapers are very seasonal and they are having the same issue, right? So not only are the bids higher, but they don't have any capacity to do the work. So I kind of anticipating the question, well, what would it cost us to put this back in? And the answer is, we had 165, we have 86. It would probably at our old budget estimate cost us close to 280 to put this back in, but I don't think we will get bidders at 280, right? We have to get a whole nother group of landscapers to bid on city work. So, and when I say other landscape companies, I mean big ones, right? Who do this type of work, and they would typically charge more than some of the smaller companies who have done this work. So that's kind of a quick summary I wanted to give of how we got here, and now maybe you can go and ask specific questions, members. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. So again, you and I obviously had a comprehensive conversation offline, so I don't want to just kind of regurgitate that conversation for the benefit of my colleagues and others watching this meeting. But a couple of things in particular that I do want to ask you and get your commitment on. The first is, well, as Greg knows, but perhaps for others' benefit, there's 2 aspects to this. It's conversion of medians to concrete, conversion of medians to turf, as was articulated. The conversion of medians to concrete was on our council agenda last Tuesday in terms of approving the plans and specifications. As it relates to the areas downtown, I looked at those and I thought, considering how narrow they are and perhaps hazardous to maintain in terms of the small width of those medians, I didn't think it was that big a deal, although I would have liked to see us continue to have green space in those areas. That's not what my main concern is tonight. My main concern, as you know, Greg, is the conversion to all turf on John Nolan Drive in the downtown area, adjacent to Law Park, adjacent to Monona Terrace. You had mentioned in your overview that it was your staff's intention to reach out to partners, be it UW, for example, near the engineering campus, or Monona Terrace, to see if there were other funds available, for example, room tax. Could you just say a little more about that and confirm that your staff hasn't had the opportunity to make those overtures yet, but you intend to do so?
Yeah, thank you, Alder Revere. Yes, that is all correct. So we have not reached out to Connie or the UW yet, but we do have plans to do that. It's also true, based on our conversations prior to the meeting, I checked with Steve Van Rivers. We did, this fund did receive some funding from the room tax. That stopped in 2014. The 2015 budget did not include those funds. Our finance person, Steve Van Rivers, indicated to me we engineering used to receive about $10,000 a year for that reason. And actually in 2017, he also informed me there was a proposal to fund a good hunk of this on a very specific set of roads that were deemed entrances to the city, all by the room tax. And that proposal at that would have been to Mayor Soglin at that time, was not accepted. So that covers kind of both of these, but we will reach out to Connie, and we will reach out to Gary Brown at the UW to see if they have any interest. And for other members, we did, Rob and Doran did have discussions about reaching out to private firms to sponsor medians, in areas that might interest them. And while it's true we could get sponsors, we cannot acknowledge them in the right of way yet at this point. So we can't put a sign in the median and say this is sponsored by blank, right? That is not allowed by ordinance at this time. So we did look into that, but Attorney Visti indicated that is not allowed currently, at least the signage part. Although you could volunteer to take this over and fund it, and just not get credit for it publicly, I guess would be the way to describe that.
Thank you. And you had I'm sorry.
I would just suggest, Greg, that if you're interested in room tax, you have 2 members of the Room Tax Commission on the Zoom at the moment, rather than asking staff.
Sorry, Mayor, I did not bring this up. This was a discussion through Alder Revere. I was really just kind of responding to his question. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. And Greg, you anticipated, of course, my next question as it related to Monona Terrace and other funds, more specifically, perhaps room tax. So as you know from our conversation, I had sponsored a budget amendment many years ago to facilitate that transfer from Monona Terrace to engineering to take care of the medians on John Nolan Drive, because I thought that they needed some tender loving care. And I had always assumed that carried forward in future years. Obviously, that has not carried forward in the last many future years, even pre-pandemic. So I'm obviously keenly interested in this conversation and appreciate the mayor acknowledging that Alderperson Carter and I are also room tax commissioners. And so I know that you and Carissa are committed to this. I just wanted to ask you then if you could explain to us that the plans and specs that were approved by the Common Council only relate to conversion to concrete. And I believe those are going out to bid shortly to be advertised. As it relates to, for example, the areas around Monona Terrace and perhaps, areas more closer to the Coliseum, Dane County Expo Center, and the other areas of John Nolan Drive, East Wash, perhaps, that are proposed to remove the landscaping and convert that to turf to be maintained by Parks. And by the way, Eric and Lisa are still in the meeting from Parks. You had asked if they were still here, Greg. Could you just share with us, or Carissa, the timing and your commitment that you won't go out to bid to remove the landscaping, for example, on John Nolan Drive, until we have the time to have full conversations about this, and the plans and specs will go to the board, and and the council around what time period are you estimating?
Yes, so that is all correct. We separated under our existing budgetary authority. We have enough funding to pursue the concrete conversion. And so since the work for the concrete and the work to convert to turf will be carried out most likely by very different contractors, we wanted to separate this anyway and do two different projects. And since we only had budgetary authority for one, the concrete is more time sensitive because you can't do that, without more work as you get into the colder part of the season. So the authorization to advertise and receive bids that went to the council this past week was only for the concrete work, and that is proposed to bid this Friday. The remainder of the work that we're discussing with association with this budget amendment tonight will not be bid. We will still have to come back and get authorization to advertise and receive bids for that project, right? So this budget amendment will go back to council then, obviously, and be acted upon. Once that is done, we would then work on a standard, board council approval for a set of authorizing a set of plans and specs separately. That would probably happen in the next month. So we do have time to work out any adjustments that we can within our budgetary limits.
Thank you. And lastly, you want to just give a final word, although I know this probably isn't the final word. I know Alder Carter and perhaps others have questions of you, Greg, but why referral of this budget amendment is not timely at this time? I guess you already mentioned it since you're going out to bid on Friday, but what the impact would be if we actually referred the budget amendment before us now to a future meeting.
So I guess I do have the calendar in front of me. I could walk through the time frame if we wanted to, but the concrete can still be advertised under the action the council took last Tuesday night and existing budgetary authority. That conversion to concrete can occur, barring direction not to proceed with that. I would like to do that because under the schedule we have for that, and given the difficulty of getting contractors that everyone is experiencing this time, we're going to get that concrete work done basically right before fall this year, before I would have to do cold weather protection. And that's just a whole lot more work to do concrete when you get into November and December, right? It's just harder to do. This work, if we would delay this budget amendment, what it really does is, as it sits right now, engineering is gonna have to maintain, our operations staff is gonna have to maintain all of these medians that we are trying to convert to turf for the majority of the summer, right? On what I would call an emergency basis. But we are not going to go through and do what Carissa would normally do, which is replant them, remove garbage. We have contracts to do all that stuff. That is not going to happen. So the longer we push this off, the more I have to lean on operations to do this until I get a contractor on board. So we still have to come through and do an approval for plans and specs. I would like obviously what you would like is what matters, but I would like to get the budget amendment done and then work with everybody on plans and specs to try and address concerns and go that route rather than delay the entire package to the point where we might not be able to get it done this year, and it would have to be bid in 22 for 2023 work.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter, questions?
Yeah, Greg, Alder Revere asked most of my questions, but I do have a question regarding both the concrete and the turf. As you know, the medians on John Nolan Drive and the runoff does affect our lakes. So what can you tell me, what kind of concrete or what kind of precautions are we using to prevent that runoff?
So from most of these in terms of impacts to the lake from the additional impervious area, it is really, I hesitate to use this example, but it's the drop in the bucket, right? This is a really small amount of concrete compared to the watershed that these lakes are. So I would argue that it is it's not material in terms of its impact. There is some, right? There's every there is a little more runoff associated with concrete than a planted bed. There's no question associated with that. But on the flip side, the goal of this and our engineering other budget as a whole, this year is a little odd in that we are really doing some of these big conversions, but what we have been doing since 2017 is really trying to convert a lot of our big turf medians that are hard for parks to mow to things that only have to be mowed once a year, right? And are much better for pollinators than grass. Grass is not a big fan for anybody, really. It doesn't provide habitat. It requires Eric to do a lot of work about every 10 days in terms of getting crews out here to mow it. And so after we make these conversions, we will still, and going forward, I have a whole different presentation that Carissa put together. What we are trying to do going forward is not create these problems for ourselves again, right? So new medians that are going in with, say, Chris Pedakowski's project on County Highway M that went in with the Midvale work, right? We tried to do a better job that went in with Gammon. We tried to do a better job of doing this. I hesitate to call it right, but at least thinking about this long term, right? Up front. So we do this right. So I think you could make an argument, Alder, that a lot of these ones that are going to concrete probably could have been concrete to begin with. They are very hard to maintain, certainly too narrow to mow, and very difficult for crews to get into and maintain planted beds. So
thank you. And just food for thought, and I will talk to you offline, but we are looking at the fact that the AEC does not have a stormwater program at all. So we are talking about a lot of runoff all of a sudden. But we can talk about that more. You're well familiar with my issues in that area, so we'll talk about that offline. But thank you very much for the clarification.
Certainly, Alder.
Thank you, Alder Figueroa Cole, questions?
Thank you, Mayor. Hi, Greg. So I know we talked, I sent a message, I don't know, last month about this particular work and was trying to touch on base with you guys on regards to using this as an opportunity to implement traffic calming designs on those mediums. And I think, I understood most of the feedback provided, but I'm still, part of the response was that this work is almost exclusively on major arterials such as North 4, Packers, John Nolan, and murals of this type will need to be implemented with other geometric changes on roads of this type, which I understand, but isn't it kind of the object of Vision Zero and Safe Streets? Isn't that part of their goals to change the geometry of the street? So I still don't understand why we couldn't leverage this opportunity to work with that budget to create something that helps in those major arteries to control traffic behavior. Can you help me understand that a little bit more, please?
So I will try, but but now you're a little bit outside my area of expertise. I am mostly a sewer guy. I see Rob and Tom are both on the call. Perhaps they can answer this better. But when you had contacted us, like a month ago or whatever, the contact was specifically, as I recall, Alder, you were asking about kind of like street murals, I think was the question, and could you incorporate those with this project? And I didn't answer that question without asking other people, right? So
I imagine.
So I did check into that, right? And my understanding is the street murals on streets like Northport and University Avenue and stuff are just, again, this is not my area of expertise, but are not appropriate for that. It's more of a placemaking thing in a downtown area, at least because I did do some research on it because I thought it was interesting after I got answers from smarter people on the subject than me. But I think to make the traffic calming in changes you're talking about on Northport require actual physical changes to the lanes, right? If you wanted to do this, and I've heard Yang talk about this on East Washington as well. As you get further out, if you really want to, change habits out there, you have to make real physical changes in what that road is designed to do, because people will drive it the way it was designed, or typically. So I think that's all I can say. If Rob or Tom have things to add, I don't know if Yang's on the call today, but they are certainly more knowledgeable on this subject than I am.
Although Greg is correct, the short version is that the murals are an effective traffic calming technique for smaller neighborhood streets, but they're really not appropriate for these larger arterials.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Greg. I mean, I was like, one of the feedback provided was on respect to East Washington, and we had such a horrible summer last year, and I just thought that perhaps we could really stretch our imagination a little bit and see if we could use whatever help we can use on that street. At this moment, we don't want to have a repeat of last summer. So hence what I'm kind of like, again, pushing the subject. I understand it. I understand the perspective, but I don't know. I would like that to be explored, if not on this case, in future projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Alder. I'm fairly convinced that Yang and his staff are doing everything they possibly can.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Seeing Alder Verveer.
Thank you. This isn't further questions of engineering staff, but a question for the finance director, please. Dave, as you know, we do have a room tax commission meeting that's scheduled in a few weeks on May 17th. Could I just ask your kind of off the cuff opinion in this forum quickly? Do you believe that action of the room tax commission would be necessary if we wish to continue funding some of the maintenance of the existing landscaping in the medians adjacent to Monona Terrace, or for that matter, Alliant Energy Center? In the case of Monona Terrace, as I mentioned, we had a budget amendment that simply had an interdepartmental transfer from Monona Terrace to engineering other for at least a few years. So anyway, what's your thought on this? Does it actually require room tax commission specific action in the short term, or is it something that if Monona Terrace believes that they could provide some assistance with, it won't require room tax commission action?
I think Alder Verveer, that if Monona Terrace were to decide to fund it from their own budget, presumably that could come from that part of their budget that's not room tax supported. So that could be an option that would not require the room tax commission's involvement. So I think if somehow the medians are connected to what, Monona Terrace as a facility, then room tax funding might be appropriate for that. As you know, there are certain requirements about how those room tax dollars be used. So I think it comes down to, can Monona Terrace, first of all, fund that? And if they can, where it would come from. If they can't, and it's just from a new room tax appropriation, then yes, that would require the room tax commission's approval.
And if it's the latter, Dave, and thank you for your response. If it's the latter, Dave, is it something that we could have a mid-year motion on to affect the 2022 room tax appropriations, for example, at our next meeting in next month?
I think that would be better discussed in a room tax commission meeting, looking at what the projections are, because, as of that would have to come out of any sort of remaining balance in the room tax fund. But we can talk further about that. But whether or not they can do it in May, I suppose it's a possibility to do something like that.
Certainly. Thank you again, Dave. And if I could just humbly request if you could perhaps circle back to me prior to you finalizing the next room tax commission agenda, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. Any further questions? It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor of item 12? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item 12, and that brings us to the end of our agenda. Alder Furman?
Move adjournment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor of adjournment? Seeing no objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your night.